Welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. We are so glad that you're joining us here today. Dr. Kim and I are in the studio. We're ready to talk about all things communication. And we know that this is a pretty common issue for couples. So we're here to equip you with some great information about the 5 levels of communication and how to use them and how not to misuse them in your marriage. So we're going to get started here. But before we do, I want to let you know that at the end of the episode, we'll be mentioning a couple great free resources we have for you to help your communication in marriage. Just some practical, tactical things we've created here at Awesome Marriage to help you with this pain point. So make sure to stay tuned all the way to the end for that. And Dr. Kim, let's get talking about communication. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, great. Because I've got a big question for you. Will you go ahead and tell us what are the 5 levels
Okay.
of communication and if they all belong in a marriage?
The 5 levels are, the first one is, and we'll go into more depth on it, but the first one is small talk. The second is exchanging information. The third is sharing ideas, thoughts, and judgments. Fourth is feelings and emotions. And number 5 is open and vulnerable. And I think they all do play a part. If I really think of days with Nancy or over a week or so, that we go to all those levels. No, we don't go to all of them every day. But I think what you want in a marriage is to be able to go to every level if you need to, especially the more the vulnerable feelings, emotions, those kind of things that we need to do. So just think about your life. As you go through a day, you communicate with never different people. You communicate in different ways. You pass someone on the street, in the hallway, you say, "How are you?" You stand in line at the coffee shop, you see a friend, you recount information about a common neighbor, a common friend that you have. You've got lunch with a close friend. You take time to share some of your ideas with them. After work, you stop at your best friend's house. You begin to share how you feel about things in your life or things went on that day, things in the world. And if you talk long enough, you might even share on a very emotional, personal level. And all of those are ways we communicate. All are necessary depending on who we're with, what's going on in our life. And so we need to be able to do those with our spouse. When we do, I think it really helps us get to that oneness, an intimate level that I think it's hard to get there without it. Communication is so essential, and it's always, I don't know if there's ever a couple that comes in for counseling that communication is not one of their issues. So it is so important.
Yeah, so that's such a good point because, you tell us the 5 levels, right? And it sounds pretty simple. Like, okay, those are 5 different levels that sound easy enough. But at the same time, almost everyone says they struggle with communication. Most couples are coming in for counseling because they can't communicate about things effectively. So, what we're going to try to do today is uncover the breakdown. So, I want to kind of get into these one by one so we can unpack where people actually might be running into issues with each of these levels. So, the first level is pretty cut and dry, just small talk, but sometimes in marriage it can feel like small talk is like not even important because you should be talking about deeper things. I don't know if other people have had those misconceptions, but small talk seems kind of like you could just skip it and no big deal. But what does that do in a marriage? Like, what does that look like in marriage?
Well, I think it is a level of connection. Maybe it's not a
Mm-hmm.
deep connection, but it's acknowledging the other person. Even if it's just when you get in, how was your work day? I mean, how was your day today? There's no, in that level, there's no really personal sharing or anything. It's just small talk, basic information. When I
Mm-hmm.
come home in the evenings, we usually start this. Nancy usually will say, "How was your day?" And
Mm-hmm.
so from there, it can go to different levels, but that usually is where it starts. And
Mm-hmm.
then I may have say, "Well, yeah, I saw so and so. That's a good friend of both of ours when I went to lunch today." It's just that kind of, for us, it's kind of touch and base. What happened when we were apart today? Did he, just that kind of stuff. That's just general. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think guys are pretty good at this because it's pretty safe, and so I think that one's pretty easy for most guys. It just gets harder as we go into some of the different levels, which we'll talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Are there any common mistakes that you see couples making on this first level of communication?
Yeah, I think if you just don't take time to do that. If I walked
Mm-hmm.
in the evening and we didn't acknowledge each other or say, "Hey, how was your day? How are you doing?" I mean, that would be kind of weird. It would be very weird
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
us. And I think the other is if the other person you feel like they're not listening. You come in and you say, "Hey, how was your day?" and they keep
Mm-hmm.
doing what they were doing. So that can
Mm.
be a problem. You need to be, when your spouse says something, even if it's just on that small talk level, that you acknowledge that you heard that. And so, yeah, it was,
Mhm.
I think those are the things where I see people can kind of get in trouble with that. And I think it's easy, maybe your
Mhm.
wife comes in or I'm sitting there and I'm watching something and Nancy does something that's on that level, but I don't lower the volume or I don't turn off the TV. And then, I think that just sends a negative vibe to her that I don't want to have. I want that small talk to be something that we do pretty easily and that we listen to each other. And, usually it doesn't take very long for that to happen.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so if you're not gonna engage on that short level or on that first level, then we're really gonna run into some problems later, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good thing. It's not that they do kind of build on each other actually. And so really the foundational thing is just that you just talk to each other, that you really, and that you listen to each other because that's
Yeah.
so important. As we go to different levels, it becomes more and more important, the listening part of it.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. So going into that, the listening is gonna matter more when you get into exchanging information, and boy, have I heard and experienced some issues with exchanging information. The whole, "You never talked about that. We never had that conversation." I'm sure that you've lived this too, Dr. Kim. Let's talk about that
it,
level
it,
of communication.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I have couples when like in counseling, and one of them will be sharing some informational type things with me, and the spouse goes, "Well, I didn't know that. Why
Yeah.
didn't you tell me?" They've told their friends, they've told me, and now the spouse is there. So that kind of information that can be about kids or friend, family member, maybe not someone we really personally know, just maybe something we've heard about someone. And so
Mhm.
these are both pretty safe, the small talk in this, because you really haven't revealed much about yourself. When the early in a relationship, when you're getting to know your future spouse, it was a way just to kind of learn more and get information about each other without and still being pretty
Mhm.
safe in doing it. I can tell, we're dating. Nancy found out things I like, things I didn't like, some of my interests, things like that, just information in me with her, but we didn't get into some real deep things right off the
Mhm.
bat. And so I think that takes time. But sometimes if you don't exchange that information, like Lindsay was saying, it can really be, you just feel kind of weird as a spouse if you're standing there or you're in a group or you're having dinner with a couple other friends and everybody knows, all the women know what your wife is talking
Mm.
about and you've never heard it before, or vice versa. It could be the other way.
Mhm.
And so I think it is important to do that and take time to do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, you don't wanna be surprised by information about your spouse. At the same time, the thing that comes to my mind with this level of communication is the thing where, I know I've told Brian something. I know we had a conversation about it's just informational things, information. But then when it comes
Yep.
up again, he's, "No, we never talked about that." And I've seen this happen with many other couples as well. And it's like, where did we go wrong on that? It was so simple. I know that I said it. I know he was in the room. Where did we fall apart? Do you know the answer?
Yeah, and I think that does happen. It happens to us for sure. But I think it just goes back when your spouse is talking, you really need to be facing them, look in the eye and listening.
Mm,
Because if Nancy is kind of, maybe
mhm,
she's at her desk and she's doing some stuff, and I look in and maybe she looks up, but her mind is, and then she goes back, and I say, well, this isn't this, and hey, we're supposed to be here at 7 o'clock Friday night. And then
mhm,
Friday morning, I say, don't forget about what we're doing tonight. She goes,
mhm,
what do you mean what we're doing tonight? Those kind
mhm,
of things. And so I think it is, even though it's not at a deep level of conversation, it's important that you are paying attention to each other when you're sharing information, that you value it, that you listen to each other. Just focus. Just those basic things. And I think we have learned is if we're really not facing each other and looking at each other, there's a good chance we're not going to hear it. I mean,
mhm.
even just casual stuff that you think, well, how did you not hear that?
Yeah.
But we don't, because our minds can go other places and we're not always tuned in. And I think sometimes we think our spouse is tuned in and they're not. But if Nancy and I, if we're looking at each other
Mhm.
and we're listening, then we know that the other person heard that thing.
Yeah,
And
I
there's
think
so
you're
many
hitting the nail on the
distractions.
head
We
because
talk
I
about it all the time. There's so many distractions in
yes.
life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, and I think that's where if you're the speaker in this situation, it's telling me that I'm not doing a great job of making sure it's a good time to relay the information. We're kind of on the fly, in passing, and just kind of throwing out this information here and there, where if we're not really face to face paying attention, it might not get across.
Yeah, I mean, like the way our house is, if I go out the back door to the garage and Nancy, where her closet is, it's kind of just right around the corner, and the doors are open there. So if I say something on the way out the door, hey, we'll do this. I'll meet you there at 7 o'clock or something like that. There's no way she's probably going to hear what I'm saying because she's all thinking about something else. She's
Mm-mm.
getting
Yeah.
dressed. What am I going to wear today? What I have to do today? And
Hmm.
I was really bad about doing that. And then and then I'd always see, I told you, I promise I told you that. I did. You just didn't listen well. So a
Hmm.
typical guy, I put it back on her until she doesn't let me
Oh
do that
gosh.
very often or very long. So, I
Hmm.
get caught on that. And she'll say it really helps if you just make sure that I'm looking at you when you're talking to me.
That's so
Okay.
good. Yeah. That's so good.
Yeah.
That's going to solve a lot of problems for a lot of people, starting with this one. So
Yeah, me
that's
too.
good.
And you can get
Yeah.
in bad habits. I get it.
Hmm.
And we just, I think for me, I guess, I always think that she's on the same wavelength thinking about what I'm thinking about because we
Right,
may have
right.
talked about it just a little bit before, but she may have
Hmm.
already gone on to something else.
Hmm.
And even sometimes when she's listening, that she goes, "What are you talking about? Where did that come from?" And I go, "Well, remember
Right,
we talked about
right.
this
Yeah,
10 minutes ago." And so
yeah,
if we it is just important to listen well to each other.
yeah. Yes, that's good. I think that's going to be a huge one for our listeners because it's certainly resonating with me. And just with that basic, if you're struggling here, it's not going to help you have a good foundation for the other levels.
No. No, you're not. You're building a foundation. You're building
Mhm.
on this person cares. This person takes time to share things with me. This person acknowledges me. And that builds a connection.
Mhm.
And you got to
Yeah.
have that, or you're not going to go to some of the deeper levels.
Right. Right. And so if you don't feel connected this way, if you feel like why are we not communicating well on this level, you're going to already be frustrated and feel like you have trouble before you've even gotten to the more connective levels of communication.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's move on to level 3. So this is sharing thoughts, ideas, and judgments. What is that going to look like in marriage?
Well, this I think is when you begin to reveal a little bit about yourself. What are you really thinking? The first two that we just talked about are really pretty safe as long as you're listening to each other. But this I think is common, and again, as you're building a relationship, you want to get to know each other. So Nancy and I would talk about the surface things, but then as the longer we went together, the safer we felt. We would begin to tell each other what we thought about some things and ideas, things like that. And so I think they're really important in marriage too, because it helps us touch base with each other, get
Hmm.
information. I think this is the first risk level of the five where we begin to share these ideas and judgments. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like if when Nancy and I were dating, if I'd shared some things and she just thought you're really weird or didn't accept them, or I thought something else, then that probably would have ended the relationship then. Because
Mm-hmm.
if we share something at this level with somebody and they are not accepted, then we tend to retreat. We tend to back off. And so I think you've got to realize in marriage that you want to be able to share these things with the other person. The
Mm-hmm.
person's going to listen to what you share and that they're going to value that just because they don't have to completely agree with everything, but you
Mm-hmm.
want them to accept this is what you feel about something. This is what my ideas are about something. And so you feel willing to be vulnerable and share some of those things knowing your spouse is not going to just say something really back to you, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, or what are you thinking, or those kind of things. They're going to say, oh,
Right.
they're going to affirm you in that.
Yeah, that's so important because, yeah, you're right. If this isn't going well, then it's going to shut down that connection big time. And so, what are the common mistakes that you see couples making when it comes to this level?
If we just throw cold water on it, or they're
Mm-hmm.
saying something and we don't listen, because when you take the time to share something at that level, you really
Mm-hmm.
want the other person to be listening. And the other thing I think sometimes we don't value the differences.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of seeing and embracing them and saying, well, that is a different perspective than mine or whatever,
Mhm.
how does God want to use that in my life? Is God using my spouse to grow me in an area now, to really look at it? And I think sometimes I see this with guys. I've seen it in counseling. We get to an area that really begins to be a little more deeper level, more vulnerable level.
Mhm.
That guys are uncomfortable with that, and so their tendency is
Mhm.
to say, just to kind of dismiss that and not to go there with the spouse. And I think it's really
Mhm.
important that we do that. I mean, it would be really boring if Nancy and I were exactly alike. Her
Mhm.
differences,
Mhm.
my differences is what have shaped us, and we've learned from each other. And do we always agree completely on everything? No, but we value each other and we try to talk it through. And at the end, if
Mhm.
we don't agree completely on something, that's okay. We may look
Mhm.
at, we may like one team better than the other for different reasons,
Yeah.
or little things, or it may be some big things. But I think that is where we would get in trouble with that. Is if we just don't value those differences, we don't listen well to
Mhm.
them, or we just kind of cut our spouse off in the middle of trying to share something with us that really is important to them. If it's important to Nancy, it's got to be important to me, and that
Mhm.
has helped me. Doing that has helped me so much because I don't always understand everything you're saying or why this is important to her,
Mhm.
or why are we even talking about this? But it's
Right.
important to her, so I've learned to make it important to me, and she does the same thing.
Mhm. I'm so glad you said that because I feel like that's a really easy thing to run into at this point because a lot of times in marriages you'll have one couple or one spouse who's more of a talker than the other, and I can see and have seen how in marriage that kind of discrepancy of like one spouse wants to talk about almost everything they saw and felt and experienced, and the other one's going, I don't really know why. Why we're, but if it's important to them, make it important. And I think that's one
Yeah.
place too where I think it could get, at a certain point, it could get overwhelming for the less talkative or less open spouse. And so that's where it could be a good place to bring in that 1 to 10 rating scale that you mention a lot of times with communication, because
Mhm.
there might be a point,
Absolutely.
where one spouse kind of does reach a max. And I think about this too, because if you think about if you have kids, it's easy to see. They'll talk to you for hours about, their favorite Star Wars character. And I'm going, who was that? I don't remember who that was. I can't really track with you. I'm like, I'm not going to make that important to me. Like I want to get bond and connect, but there's a limit there, right? And it's appropriate
Yes.
to set a limit and say,
Right.
let's talk about something we both understand or something like that. But in marriage, kind of wrangling that difference is going to be difficult.
Yeah, I think it can be. Yeah, with Star Wars, you can say with your kid, yeah, I'm so glad you love that. That is so cool that you're involved with that. You
Yeah.
know more than anybody I know about Star Wars. I don't know very much, but you've really helped me learn more. And then get into different, bring up something else. You can, and I guess you can do those. I think with our spouse, we have to be careful because we've got to really
Mhm.
know how important. Like you said, the 1 to 10 is a great idea because if it really is, if I'm just thinking, what is this going on, and Nancy has told me this is a 10, then I'm gonna tune in
Yeah.
and know that I've really got to be listening well to this and ask good questions till I do
Mhm.
at least understand what she's saying and why she's saying it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, I want every couple to feel that comfort level to share all this stuff, but at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge that difference in how much communication each spouse naturally gravitates towards.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to communication. You need to be a student of your spouse, and if
Mhm.
you've got a spouse that kind of really responds better to put it, you can still talk about things that are important to you, but in a bullet point form. They're going
Sure.
to
Yeah.
hear that. But if you go on and on and on, you may lose them in that. And so part of it is when I communicate with Nancy, I want to
Mhm.
communicate in a way that I think she will hear. And so if I know that if I go on
Mhm.
and on and on about things that I'm going to lose her, so that's not the best way for me to
Mhm.
communicate with her. I need to be a little more concise in that. So I think it's, you know, instead of blaming our spouse because they're not listening well or whatever, it's how am I communicating to them? Am I communicating
Mhm.
to them something that's important to me in a way that they can hear because I want to connect with them? And so I
Mhm.
think that's where being a student of your spouse, maybe asking questions. Hey, we had that conversation last night. How did that go? Did you any feedback for me? Because I
Mhm.
felt like I kind of went on and on about a few things, and then Nancy can say, yeah, I got it the first sentence you said. And
Right.
I knew you need to process a little bit, but that may have been a little too much. And
Mhm.
learning to be honest with each other and not being defensive or your feelings hurt about it, you're figuring out how to best communicate with each other. And
Mhm.
so you're going to go through some struggles and you're going to go
Mhm.
through some things that may be a little uncomfortable. But what you get on the other side is going to make your communication so much better and so much easier for the moving forward in your marriage. So it's worth it to go through
Mhm.
those things.
Yeah, that's such an important point, and I really appreciate that encouragement because I do feel like that's a pain point for a lot of couples where they just kind of think, well, my spouse should like the way I talk to them because this is what I need in marriage. But we have a responsibility to grow in self-awareness, and marriage is a beautiful way to do that because it gives us the closeness.
Absolutely.
But if we get defensive or if we're just really determined that we need to stay exactly how we are, it might really stop the connection.
Yeah, it's the old insanity thing that we've talked about in
Right.
different scenarios, but doing the
Right.
same thing over and over, expecting a different result, it just doesn't work. And so you keep, instead of saying, "Well,
It doesn't.
what do I need to change to make this work?" We keep trying the same thing. And if it hadn't worked two, three, four, five times, why in the world do you think it's going to work the sixth time?
Right. Right.
Because it's not.
It's not. It's really not. Oh man,
No,
that was worth the
no.
price of admission. That was worth the price of admission. But we've got two more levels of communication to talk about. And I have a feeling there's
Okay.
some important stuff here too. So level 4, that's more of your thoughts and feelings, or sorry, feelings and emotions about things. What's that look like? What are the issues that we run
Yeah, that's
into?
so. I think feeling emotions are so important. And it's so important to be able to share that with your spouse. So if you've given your thoughts, ideas that we talked about in level 3, and that's accepted, then we might share how we feel about something. It can be risky sometimes, especially if you've been in relationships or other situations where that wasn't accepted. So we really usually
Mhm.
reserve that type of communication for someone we really trust. And in my opinion, our spouse should be that person, should be the first person, the first
Mhm.
go-to person in that. And so, if Nancy's just talking to me, sharing some things, and maybe she's talked about like on a level 3, hey, do you remember Jack in our office? I'm go, yeah. And then she might say something like, he's getting a divorce. Okay, then we're sharing that information. But she said, he was talking to a few of us. He's didn't want the divorce. He's so sad. He sits at his desk and he just kind of stares. And I know he hadn't been a perfect husband because I know his wife, but he loves her. I feel sad for him and his kids. But so you get to where you're able to take that more than Jack's getting a divorce. It's able that you're able to say really how you feel about it. And my role would be to say, yeah, that really is sad, not to say, well, it's stupid. He's a jerk. No, that's not going to get anything done in communication.
Mhm.
And it could be any emotion. It could be anger, mad,
Mhm.
frustration, whatever it is. Good emotions, negative, positive, negative, all those kind of things that we have. And God gave us all of them to be able to share those with your spouse and know that your spouse is going to accept where you are. Try to identify with
Mhm.
what you are, knowing that Nancy is a very sensitive person and she really cares about people. And when something happens to somebody else, it's hard for it not to affect her or to touch her in a deeper way. And so I
Mhm.
need to let her say those things.
Yeah.
I probably in that situation, I may not have gone the same place she did, but she did.
Mhm.
And she
Mhm.
wants to be able to share that with me. So I need to be there to listen to her.
Absolutely. I've heard actual spouses say, "Well, what if my spouse is sharing something, sharing feelings, but their feelings are wrong?" What do you say to that?
Feelings aren't wrong. First
Mm.
place, I would say. And I try to say it in a way, especially in counseling. Now, God gave us all of our feelings,
Mhm.
and you can't really question someone's feelings. And all of our feelings are there for a reason. We're happy and when something great happens. We're sad when something sad happens. Those kind of things. And so to tell someone their feelings are wrong is really to discount them,
Mm.
I think, in a big way, especially if they're sharing from something in their heart. Yeah, you shouldn't feel sad for him because he's such a jerk. What's wrong with you feeling
Mhm.
sad for him? Well, that's not going to help Nancy. It's not going to help me. It's certainly not going to help our marriage.
Mhm.
And why would I say that then? Why would I say something like that when she's talking about how she feels about a situation. And so I think anytime we tell someone our emotions are wrong. Now, if you can feel like, say your spouse is really angry at you because something you did and they're sharing that, how it made them feel. And, it's okay then to say, I did not want to make you angry. I am so sorry that happened. It's not that their
Mhm.
feelings are wrong. It's really that what I
Mhm.
did didn't convey the message I wanted it to her. Her feelings were
Mhm.
valid in how she
Mhm.
received that. And so I just don't think there's any time you can
Mhm.
say that your feelings are wrong.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's counselor wisdom and expertise right there. It's funny because I've heard this question more than once, like, and it kind of shows that there's a lot of misunderstanding around feelings, their purpose, the way that they work in relationships. So that's really helpful.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about things that are pretty healthy. If someone's got some trauma from the past or something else, and they're projecting that onto their spouse or something
Mhm.
like that. Well, their feelings aren't wrong. It's like, hey, we need to, let's work through this. Or,
Mhm.
you've talked about going to a counselor to kind of work through some of those past things. Let I'll go with you the first time if you want. I'll go
Mhm.
with you every time if you want me to. Let's address that. But not, you just
Mhm.
don't tell them their
Mhm.
feelings are wrong. Because what do you do with that?
Right.
Brian tells you that your
Right. Right.
feeling is wrong. I mean, what do you do with that? It just
Right.
puts a wall up
There's not much
between
to
the two
do.
of you.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, so
no.
I'm gonna throw one more at you because of something you just said. So you said in this situation, if the spouse is projecting, they probably need to work something through. They mentioned going to a counselor. Feel like the more common scenario I've seen, just in ministry and at large, is that the person is not interested in counseling, and they're like, "Nope, I'm not. I don't need it. You might need it, but I don't need." So what do you do in that situation?
I think you just pray for them, and you
Mm-hmm.
you pray for wisdom of how do you handle this thing. You pray for healing for your spouse. You pray for
Mm,
anything that comes to your mind like that. Or if you may not know what to pray, you just say, "God, we need your
mm-hmm.
help," and we just ask for that right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't like
Mm.
pray in front of your spouse doing that. I think that's something you pray privately
Right.
because then that's probably going to cause a
Right.
problem at that time. It's not like you said, "Let me
Yes,
raise
yes.
my hands and pray over you." No, that's probably not the right time to do that. So I
Yeah.
would say that I think God wants what's best for your spouse. You've got to always remember that.
Mhm.
God
Mhm.
is much more patient than we are. And just because you may not see it today does not mean that God's not working. And I think it's through prayer and trust and asking God to help you through this situation. Help me
Mhm.
love my spouse through this. Help me not do anything that's going to get in the way of what you're doing. Those kind of things. And maybe at some point, your spouse will go to counseling.
Mhm.
Maybe at
Mhm.
some point, and they may not be willing to tell you why they're not willing to go. They may just say, I'm not going.
Right.
So,
Mhm.
again, coming alongside them, loving them, that's the best thing you can do at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's really helpful because you've also advised, if that's a situation you're in, you could still go to counseling without the spouse and you can work on responding in a healthier way. And I think it's just tough because I've seen it happen so many times where it's somebody who you kind of see that hard exterior and there's a lot going on there and they're like, "I am fine. I do not need
Yeah.
any counseling." And it's like, why are you so
Right.
resistant? Because you say it's good for others. It's just a disconnect. I'm a little passionate about the topic. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you want to make if you're going to go on your own, it's to make sure your spouse doesn't know. I'm going to go figure out how to change you. No, I'm going to go. I want to love you the best way I can, and I want someone
mhm,
to help me see the best way to love you through this.
that's good. That's really good. Well, so that brings us to the fifth and final, the deepest level of communication, which is the open and vulnerable communication. So, what does that look like in marriage?
Yeah, I think we all need somebody that we can be really open and honest with and know that they'll still love us. I mean, that is
Hmm.
such a precious thing to get. And I think the what God designed is for that to happen for those of in marriage, happen in the marriage relationship. That whatever I say to Nancy, that whatever I share with her, that she is still going to love me through that. There's no relationship in this life that holds that possibility more than the marriage relationship. And I
Hmm.
know that I can talk to her from the depths of my heart and she's going to be there for me. And so that acceptance is so key. And I think for guys where it's hard to get to that level of vulnerability, and when we
Hmm.
do, to know that our wife accepts that is going to be huge in helping us to continue to be able to get there. Women for the most part seem to be able to get there a lot easier than guys do. But I
Mhm.
think it's so important for us guys to continue to persevere to get there, and our wife's role in that certainly is to pray for us, but to accept us when we get there, and to say, I mean, I remember the first time I was ever really vulnerable in prayer. We were praying together, and I finished, and just a typical guy thought, "Oh, that you wimp! What did you just do?"
Right.
And then I looked at Nancy and she had tears in her eyes. So I mean, I
Mhm.
know that affirmed what I did, and that touched her. It helped me to be able to talk at that level about what I was
Mhm.
talking about. And so the acceptance part of it is so crucial.
Yes. Yes. So, what makes it hard? What makes it hard to accept a spouse there?
They may be saying something that shocks you or that you don't agree with, or
Mm.
anything that just that you're just not really don't know really how to process that. Well, your role at that point is to accept it. Now,
Mhm.
you can come back the next day and say, "Hey, I thought about this. Let me show you some of my thoughts." And at
Mhm.
that point, your spouse is probably going to be willing to talk to you about that. But if you
Mhm.
shut them off right in the moment, that's going to just shut the spouse down. So
Yeah.
be wise in that. Give yourself time to think about it, pray about it. Is it really something important? Do I really need to say something about this? And if you feel like you
Mhm.
do, then God help me say this in a way that my spouse will understand. So timing is a huge thing
Mm.
in that,
Mhm.
because there's things that we do need to say.
Yeah. That's very real. So, are there any other common mistakes that you do see couples making with this level?
The judging, I think, is
Mm.
really a big thing, and I guess that's kind of what we were dancing around just a little bit, because I don't want to. You
Yeah.
just don't want to judge someone else's emotions and feelings. You want to receive those, because if I start judging Nancy, that one, I'm not going to hear what she's saying the way I need to. She's not going to feel comfortable in being
Mhm.
vulnerable with me again, and so if someone's being really honest and open and vulnerable with you, and I judge them, say I judge Nancy, then we're going to be back to small talk and sharing information. We're going to flip all the way
Mhm.
back to 1 and 2, and we're going to stay there because that's safe. Three,
Right.
4, and 5 get not as safe, but those are the ones that really add the depth to a marriage relationship. It's
Mhm.
the two become one. And I think that's really, in the communication area, is a great way to live that out.
Yeah, that is so good. You're right, because we all have responsibility in that, in the way we respond to our spouse, and failing to
Yeah,
respond with that
absolutely.
empathy is going to
Absolutely.
shut it down. Yeah. Yeah, well, so Dr. Kim, has been a
Absolutely.
really helpful conversation. Lot of practical takeaways. Do you have any final piece of advice?
Yeah, I was gonna kinda give an example that I thought of, and it's just like, say, a husband and wife, and so husband comes in after the day. He goes, "How was your day?" She does, and he says, "Fine, how was yours?" Small talk. Most of us can do that pretty easy. Wife says, "New family moved in today across the street. They're from New Mexico. He works for Boeing. They got 3 kids, 2 boys, a girl who's 3. A little girl was born premature. She's still catching up." Facts.
Mm,
Then she says the husband had to go to the office for a meeting. The wife looked stressed. I felt sorry for her. I decided to help her. And so then she's getting a little more vulnerable with what she's saying. And then she says the lady's struggling. I asked her if I could help with a 3-year-old. She said that was just the wife. It's like I gave her $1 million or something. The little girl's precious. I felt sad
mm,
about the struggles, thankful our kids' good health. I spent the afternoon over there. And then finally she said, I got so emotional. I wish we could do more for them. The husband said, let's pray for them. And so that kind of the steps you can go through. Now, the husband could have train wrecked that at any point.
mm,
When
mhm,
he walked in and she said, how was your day? He can go, I never have a good day. So that's not going to do well for the next part of the conversation. And say,
mhm,
she talks about the kids, and then he goes, 3 kids. Oh my gosh. I was hoping somebody moved there that had no kids. The things that we
mhm,
can say that are just going to keep it from going to that next level. When she talks about the little girl that she feels sad about and thankful for their kids, and things like that, and you can just continue to derail those things, or say, well, you get emotional about everything. So there's a way that you can derail those conversations, and there's a way that you can continue to keep those going, because you want to be able to go from that simple greeting to that deep emotional level if your spouse needs to do that. You're not going to go through all 5 levels every day. We don't. But I want our relationship to be where I know and Nancy knows that whenever we need to go to that level, whatever it is,
Mhm.
we can do that. That's going to keep you close and connected. It's going to take those walls down. It's going to give you a security and a safety that you don't have without it. It keeps your spouse as your best friend that you can share everything and anything with. So hopefully that fleshes out just a little bit of how can it play out. And I think for guys, for me especially, I need to not derail that process in
Mhm.
any of those steps. I need to continue
Right.
to let Nancy process and share things with me.
That's such a good example, and I love that you gave the do's and the don'ts in that example because I think that's so true. If you're just kind of rushing through the conversation, shutting it down, you're not going to get that connection. But you showed us exactly how to keep the conversation going. That's great. Well, Dr. Kim, this has been a really helpful conversation about 5 levels of communication, how not to train wreck your communication each day in marriage. And so, listeners, we've got a great free resource that's going to help you by helping your mindset to be healthier about your marriage. It's called our 15 Better Assumptions to Make About Your Spouse resource. And this is something where it's just really helping you check your own thought life and make sure that you're making generous and kind assumptions about your spouse instead of assuming the worst. Assuming the worst about your spouse is going to lead to shutting down communication before it even starts. So, get your thought life right based on these 15 better assumptions to make about your spouse. You can grab that at the link in today's show notes. You could also go to awesomemarriage.com/resources and find everything we mentioned there. Thanks so much for tuning in, for spending your time with us today. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.